I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations.
When a young girl disappears, her family is panicked, and the only clue seems to be an unknown stranger named Johnny. Would they ever find her?
Today's destination is Sycamore, Illinois. Dating back to 1837, it is the county seat of DeKalb County and was originally called Orange, likely for the many Osage orange trees in the area. The name was later changed to Sycamore because another town in Illinois was already using the name Orange. This vibrant city of nearly 20,000 residents is located in northern Illinois and is known for its historic downtown area. It boasts Queen Anne-style homes, a historic 1920s movie theater, a Carnegie Library, and a large historic park district. And if you ever visit, their metered parking allows you to park for only a penny. But in 1957, no expense was spared when this small community launched one of the most intensive missing person searches in Illinois history.
Sycamore in the 1950s was a rural farm town, a place where people did not lock their doors. And the corner of Archie Place and Center Cross Street was a gathering place for the neighborhood children where they played games like hide and seek. There was a large tree at that corner, and the corner was lit by a streetlight. After dinner on the evening of Tuesday, December 3rd, 1957, 7-year-old second grader Maria Ridulph and her 8-year-old best friend Kathy were allowed to play together at that corner because the area had just gotten the season's first snow. Both lived close to this corner. Like we said, this was a place where all of the kids in the neighborhood gathered. And Maria's family and Kathy's family just lived 4 doors away from each other. Much like you and my sister.
That's true. But we live, I think, 6. I need more of a buffer than 4.
And I totally get that. I need 10 miles. After both girls finished dinner around 6 p.m., Kathy and Maria arrived at the corner to play a game they called Duck the Cars. Now, Kath, I really had bad feelings about what this game was and how it ended.
It sounds highly dangerous.
It really does.
Sounds like something I would have played.
Exactly. We were capturing the flag at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Right.
But what this was is the game had them run behind this large tree on the corner, which we didn't see a picture of it from 1957, but our assumption, of course, is that it was a lot of land that was around it. But they would duck behind this large tree on the corner so that they wouldn't get lit up by the headlights of the cars as they went through the intersection. So much tamer than I thought.
Exactly. Good, clean fun.
1957 fun.
Yep.
And although it was very dark in the wintertime around this neighborhood, the corner was actually brightly lit by a streetlight that illuminated the entire area.
As Maria and Kathy played, a man approached them and introduced himself as Johnny. He asked the girls if they liked dolls and if they would like a piggyback ride or a ride in his car. Maria accepted the piggyback ride, and Johnny toddled off with Maria on his back.
Oh, he toddles too.
He toddles too. When they returned to the corner, Maria ran home, which was only 3 doors away, to get her favorite doll to show Johnny. And Kathy stood there next to Johnny under the streetlight while they waited for Maria to return with her doll. Maria actually came back, then Kathy ran to her house to get mittens because she was cold. But when Kathy returned to the corner, Maria was gone. Kathy ran to Maria's house thinking that she'd gone home. Maria's older brother Charles answered the door and told Kathy that Maria was probably hiding from her, so Kathy needed to go back and find her. Kathy looked around and called out to Maria for a few minutes, but still couldn't find her. So instead, she ran home to tell her mother that Maria was missing. Kathy's mother immediately took her to the Sycamore Police Department. Sycamore Police Chief William Hindenburg and detectives sat down with Kathy to get a detailed description of everything that happened and a description of what Johnny looked like. She characterized him as tall and thin, wearing a hat, But at one point, he removed the hat and she saw that he had blonde hair, and he was also wearing a sweater with lots of colors on it, and of course, blue jeans. Kathy described Johnny as an older person, but of course, detectives knew to an 8-year-old this could have meant he was 19. Although this wasn't much to go on, Chief Hindenburg sent all of the available squad cars to drive around the city and look for Maria. Now, Kath, it's a small town. We have no idea if that means 2 or 7.
Well, especially in 1957.
Yeah, exactly. When a quick search revealed no trace of Maria, the chief decided to call for help. Using a shortwave radio system to sound the alarm, he summoned 28 fire department volunteers who searched the area. Now, very early on, Maria's doll, which had been discarded just a short distance from the corner, was found. But that was the only item found related to Maria, and they had no success in locating the little girl.
By now, and Kath, by this time it's been more than an hour, word had spread throughout the city, and concerned friends and citizens began calling in with offers to help. And so, of course, small town is great, 1957 is great. Everybody who could do anything did. Soon, 100 volunteers were aiding in the search efforts, and together they searched the entire city of Sycamore. Kath, they didn't do this once. They did this multiple times, as well as searching the roads and fields that were surrounding the city. And the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office and state troopers in the area were called in to help the Sycamore Police Department, and they began checking highways. Dozens and dozens of clues about suspicious cars, strangers, possible suspects were painstakingly checked out, and they were run down by the scores of police officers, deputies, and volunteers who were taking part. But as you can imagine, as the night wore on and the temperatures dropped, Kath, that night they dropped to about 15 degrees, and optimism began to fade. And then, of course, understandably, came the dark thoughts of perverts in the area, and other chilling cases came to everyone's mind. And police, thankfully, were able to bring in other cities to join the search to really help find Maria as quickly as they could. So, Kath, the next morning at daybreak, planes were finally able to take to the sky and provide a different vantage point for the search. And then at noon, Kathy, search parties were organized to help check nearby fields, streams, railroad rights-of-way, and other inaccessible spots. High school boys, men who stopped work, and police all joined in with the search parties. At this point, all they had to go on was that 7-year-old Maria was wearing a tan coat, which fit too tightly. We know that description came from her mother, and dark-colored corduroy jeans. But again, as the day wore on, hope of finding Maria alive faded rapidly because they still didn't have a clue as to her whereabouts, and authorities had to face the fact that it was probably unlikely that she could have survived the night in the 15-degree weather. Now, that same day, so again, we're on Wednesday, December 4th, the FBI was officially able to enter the case at 7 p.m., and Kath, I thought it was weird that they were being so specific about it, but I guess back in the day, the FBI had a strict 24-hour rule. They would not get involved in any case until 24 hours had passed.
So basically, like on the 24th hour, they're like, we're in.
Exactly.
After 1 week went by without finding Maria, police in 8 counties agreed to set up roadblocks on secondary roads to search automobiles, hoping to find clues to her whereabouts. There was still no trace of Maria or the man Johnny, despite the hundreds of residents and police who continued to search for her. The Ridulph family wished the people of this community and the surrounding territory to know how grateful we are for all the kindnesses shown us, and to know how much we appreciate all of the efforts put forth on our behalf this past week. We wish to express our temporary thanks until such a time as we can thank you all individually. Over the next several months, the police and the FBI showed 8-year-old Kathy thousands of photographs and brought her in for 20 lineups. But Kathy never identified anyone as the person she knew as Johnny. Smaller searches still continued as people returned to their daily lives, but Maria was never found over the next days, weeks, or months. according to an article in the Daily Chronicle on April 28, 1958. Now, this is almost 5 months after Maria disappeared. A retired couple traveling through the area were out looking for mushrooms, and they stumbled upon the remains of a small child. The body was located in a lonely, secluded spot in Joe Davis County, Illinois, about 2 hours west of the city of Sycamore. And so, Kath, what happened is this couple was just traveling through the area and they went into a restaurant and they were chatting with the waitress and they said, hey, we like to search for wild mushrooms. Do you know a good location? And she did. So the couple pulled over to the shoulder of the graveled road at the area where this waitress recommended, and they walked about 100 yards across this field. And when they came to a brush, they saw a huge dead tree which had fallen down. And a casual look beneath the tree for mushrooms instead revealed what appeared to them to be a skeleton of a deer. However, walking closer, the couple was horrified to see that it was actually a human body. At this point, the little body was highly decomposed.
So the couple quickly returned to their car and drove to the very first farmhouse they saw so that they could telephone the police to let them know what happened. So, Kathy, what they did is they actually telephoned the sheriff of Joe Davis County, who was a woman named Emma Grebner.
Seriously, in 1957, that's crazy.
I know.
Huh.
Honestly, I was like, is that a guy's name?
That's
like
so interesting.
Carol,
oh, yeah, totally.
Or Stacy
exactly.
or Terry. I'm like, I don't think Emma is, but
totally.
Let's check. Sheriff Grebner, along with deputies and Coroner James Furlong, summoned state troopers and went out to the scene immediately. The body lay on leaves behind this fallen tree trunk, and what they were first able to see was that from what remains were there was no sign of violence. The body was covered with a checkered black and gray shirt, a white undershirt, and a pair of brown socks were on the feet. But there were no signs of any other clothing. The body was taken to Coroner Furlong's funeral parlor, and a pathologist was summoned to make a thorough identification. At this point, the sheriff of DeKalb County was notified and asked to bring Maria's parents and other county authorities to see if an identification could be made. Understandably, Mr. and Mrs. Riddle knew what they were likely going to be told or shown. So Mrs. Riddle told the sheriff if the body wore a pair of brown socks, that would be Maria, because she had worn a pair of brown socks that were brand new on the day she disappeared. And Kath, it was so sad because when Maria's mom was shown this checkered shirt, they asked Mrs. Riddle if she could identify it. So Kath, what she did is she took the shirt and she laid it out on the floor, and she first looked on one side of it and turned it over, looked on the other very, very carefully. And then she just sat back and looked up at the men surrounding her and female sheriff and said, "This is Maria's little shirt. And I know that because this patch here," and she pointed to this little tiny hole that had been in there, "I fixed this patch with part of a garment that belonged to an older sister."
And that's so sad because you know that once she saw the plaid shirt, she probably just knew. She knew.
Well, especially the plaid shirt and the brown socks.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when Kathy and I both heard that she was found in a black and gray checkered shirt and brown socks and a white undershirt, we're like, was she wearing a guy's clothing?
That's what I like. Are these
I
men's
thought the same
clothes?
thing. Yeah, but it wasn't. They all belonged to her.
Yeah.
They also brought a dentist in, and he was able to bring dental charts from her dentist and check it with the teeth that they found in the skeleton. And so they were able to make a positive identification. This little body that was found was 7-year-old Maria Riddle. What was interesting about that, Kathy, so first of all, they weren't able to tell how long the body had been there. And remember, 1957. But they also were able to determine, however, that she had no broken bones. Even her skull wasn't fractured. And they weren't able to give a cause of death because there was nothing that they could see with what was left to see how she might have been killed. The day after Maria's body was found, they had a detail of 25 state troopers and a gazillion volunteers search a 21 square mile area where the body was found in an effort to find some clues that the killer may have left behind. But there were no signs of violence on or near the scene. Maria's body was found 144 days after she disappeared from her home in Sycamore. Kath, she had been the subject of one of the most massive and intense searches in the history of Illinois.
Kath, one of the things that struck me was that Maria's mom made a comment, or was quoted as having said, that she didn't think Maria was alive.
And this was actually just a few days after she went missing.
Exactly. And so I find that fascinating because you know how like some people are like, I know my daughter's alive. I know my daughter's alive. And they're alive.
Right.
You know, but this lady didn't say that. She made exactly the opposite observation. And if you believe that your daughter is dead, as sad as this is, you want a body.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't want to not know. But just the whole maternal intuition when it comes to kidnappings and things like that, it fascinates me. I know if I were in Mrs. Ridulph's shoes, and I truly, truly believe that, I wouldn't want to not know forever, even though the resolution is terrible.
Well, and one of the things too is that I had mentioned to you that Maria disappeared on December 3rd. On December 26th, the Ridulph family turned on their Christmas lights on their house. They hadn't done it before then, and then they were apparently gone for Christmas. But when people were like, you turned your lights on? And she said, we have to move forward. She felt that Maria was not alive, and she still had 3 kids. So Maria was the youngest of 4. She had an older brother, and then older than him, she had 2 older sisters. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's one of those things where you also can't ignore the children who are still here.
Right. According to an article in the Daily Chronicle on April 30th, 1958, 4 days after Maria's body was found, her funeral was held at the Evangelical Lutheran Church of St. John's, which was absolutely overflowing with friends and relatives and, of course, the idly curious. And then she was laid to rest at Elmwood Cemetery. And Kath, what I found very interesting was that there were 4 little girls that Maria was in a church choir with, and these little girls carried her coffin to her grave. Can you imagine being one of those little girls and thinking back, you know, on your childhood?
Yeah.
That's going to be a monumental memory.
Absolutely.
I carried my friend's coffin to a grave.
Right.
You know, and there's like a sweetness about it, but also like a, oh my God.
Yeah.
You know?
We're not supposed to lose our friends that young.
Exactly. But even as the city of Sycamore laid Maria to rest, the investigation into her death proceeded with undiminished vigor. However, no suspect was ever identified, and the case went cold for the next 50 years. In October of 2008, the Illinois State Police began investigating Maria's disappearance again. And this was the result of new information from a woman named Janet Tessier, who said that her half-brother John was the killer. According to Janet, their mother Eileen Tessier, on her deathbed in January of 1994, said, "Those 2 little girls and the one that disappeared, John did it. John did it. And you have to tell someone." Janet took the statement as meaning that her half-brother John Tessier had kidnapped and murdered Maria Ridulph. Janet had also heard from her older sisters Catherine and Jean that their mother Eileen had lied to investigators, saying that John was actually home on the night of the crime. Kath, do you have any idea why she came forward in 2008 when her mom died in 1994?
She said, the sister Janet said that she had been trying for more than a dozen years to get police detectives interested in reopening the case and had failed to do so. But it also didn't explain why suddenly then in 2008, they did start paying attention.
I'm guessing they must have been doing some investigation behind the scenes or something.
Possibly.
Anyway, so Janet told law enforcement that John, her half-brother, had threatened to kill her with a gun and had sexually molested his half-sister Jean when she was a minor. John, at the time of his mother's funeral, was estranged from the Tessier family, but just in case he was going to come, they told him not to. But Sycamore police had already spoken with John, his mother Eileen, and his stepfather Ralph back in 1957 when Maria went missing. At the time Maria disappeared, detectives determined that John Tessier had been 40 miles northwest of Sycamore at a military recruiting office. Now, Kath, even back then, John was brought to the Sycamore police station to take a lie detector test, which he passed.
Can you imagine what those were like back in 1957?
No, they probably had like electrodes and...
See, I figured it was like they'd punch you in the face, and if you're able to keep saying like, no, then you were good.
Yeah, I'm implying electric shock, not just, But yeah.
Probably more humane than a punch to the face.
Right, exactly. Like lie detectors, like did they have a baseball bat? Like were they just like rubbing it like they're going to smack you with it?
Exactly.
If you didn't,
Or take a swing and you're hoping they miss.
Exactly. But anyway, so he passed this lie detector back then, and because there was an alibi for him, he was dismissed as a suspect, and there was actually a report in the police file authored by the FBI saying that he was no longer a suspect. The day after that, Kath, he left Sycamore for basic training at an Air Force base in Texas.
With this new information coming to light from Janet Tessier, police looked into John's background in the years that followed his departure from Sycamore. And there were some troubling items that they uncovered. So initially, he spent the next 13 years in the Air Force and actually rose to the rank of captain before he left. And then in June of 1974, he became a police officer in a small town near Olympia, Washington. After spending a few years there, he joined a police department in Milton, Washington. But it was here where some of his trouble started. So he apparently clashed with the chief of police who attempted to fire him and documented a long list of complaints about his work and his conduct.
Maybe she was a woman.
You know how women are.
Exactly. They're such a pain in the ass to work for.
But in 1982 in Tacoma, Washington, Tessier took in a 15-year-old runaway named Michelle and her friend. Both of these girls felt safe with him because they knew him as a Milton police officer. However, Michelle would later testify in a case that was brought against John that shortly after she began living with him, he fondled her and then performed oral sex on her. He was charged with statutory rape, but Kath, he eventually pleaded guilty to communication with a minor for immoral purposes. He was sentenced to 1 year of formal probation and then was terminated from the police department in 1982. But now, fast forward almost 30 years, by 2011, he was in his early 70s and living in a retirement community in Northwest Seattle where he worked as a security guard. But by 2011, he wasn't known as John Tessier anymore. By now, he changed his name to Jack McCullough, saying he wanted to honor his late mother. And so at this point now, Kath, combining the information from Jack McCullough's half-sister Janet, who relayed her mother's deathbed confession, and this kind of sketchy past that they're finding that Jack has had, police reopen the investigation. And so, of course, that means that Maria's little bestie, Kathy, with a K, is brought back into the police station. And according to court records, in early September 2010, Kathy spoke with Officer Hanley, and he asked her if she remembered anything about Maria's disappearance.
And at this point, Kathy is 61.
Kathy gave Agent Hanley the same information that she remembered back from 1957, which included Maria and Kathy being given permission to go out and to play in the snow on this first snow of the season, Johnny toddling on into their lives, Maria disappearing, all of that. But then a week later, Officer Hanley returned and he showed Kathy this photo array that had 6 black and white photographs of what appeared to be teenage males circa the 1950s. And so, of course, you can imagine all of the young men were clean shaven and smiling, similar in age, similar hairstyles that you would expect from that era. But unbeknownst to Kathy, all but one of the photos were obtained from the 1957 Sycamore High School yearbook. That was the year that John Tessier / Jack McCullough would have graduated. But John Tessier, as he was known at the time, had been expelled from the school. So instead, they had to get a different picture, but it didn't look like any of the others. Because these were senior year photos, so all of the young men who graduated from Sycamore were in suits and ties. But because John hadn't, he was just in an open-collared shirt, and it had a different background. So Kathy immediately identified John Tessier's photo as that of Johnny, the young man who gave Maria the piggyback ride on December 3rd, 1957. Okay, so Because he changed his name, we're going to stop going back and forth. For this new investigation, we're just going to refer to him as Jack McCullough, not John Tessier. And on June 29th, 2011, Sycamore police officers, accompanied by Seattle police officers, executed a search warrant of McCullough's Seattle, Washington residence. 2 days later, an arrest warrant was issued and extradition proceedings were initiated. Almost 4 weeks later, on the same day McCullough was extradited, Maria's body was exhumed to check for any DNA evidence. And Kathy, what I read that they were looking for specifically was touch DNA. However, ultimately none was found for a couple of reasons. One, over the decades of disintegration, but also apparently Maria's casket had filled with water, so anything that might have been there was eroded by the elements.
So in August of 2011, a grand jury indicted Jack McCullough on 3 counts. Count 1 was for Maria's murder, count 2 was for kidnapping, and count 3 was what they called an abduction of an infant. And although Maria's parents lived well into their 90s, they were deceased at the time of McCullough's arrest. However, her 2 older sisters and her older brother were pleased to see that even after 5 decades, their sister had not been forgotten. Now, trial began in 2012, and this was a bench trial, which actually surprised me. I'm not sure why you wouldn't have wanted a jury here, but prior to trial, the defense attorneys asked to have FBI reports from 1957 admitted into evidence. Because, Kath, a lot of these reports detailed possible suspects. However, when Jack McCullough was interviewed back then he was John Tessier, when he was interviewed, they considered him a strong suspect, and there were also alibi reports contained within the FBI files. So his attorneys are like, hey, this isn't right. We want these reports admitted because these people are dead. And this violates his due process if you don't admit these reports. But the judge said, no, thank you, sir. These reports do not come into evidence. Also in an interesting twist, the state filed a motion in limine to bar McCullough from introducing a former Sycamore police lieutenant's theory that someone other than him had committed the crime. So this was a report that was written 15 years before the trial, and it was written on the 40th anniversary of Maria's disappearance. And what the lieutenant did was gather a lot of the facts and just sort of create his own report. And he opined that the man suspected in a 1951 Pennsylvania murder, so 6 years before Maria was killed, was the best suspect in Maria's case. And his name was William Henry Redmond, and he died in 1992. So he died 20 years before this case even went to trial. But in this document, the lieutenant stated that the facts of the Pennsylvania case, coupled with other facts that he saw in the file, created a level of certainty that Redmond is responsible for Maria's abduction. At the time of the trial, this lieutenant who had authored this report and opinion was alive, and he could have testified to what was contained in the document, but the trial court granted the prosecution's motion to preclude any opinion in this report from coming into evidence. The court basically said, look, this is speculative and it's too remote in time. It's not relevant. The prosecutor brought Jack's half-sisters and their friends to the stand, as well as those who knew him in 1957. Now, Kath, the primary witness for the prosecution as far as relatives went was Janet, because she was the one who was pushing the police to reopen this investigation. So some of Janet's friends testified that Jack McCullough used to like to give them piggyback rides. So Janet also talked about her mother's deathbed confession. But on cross-examination, Janet had to admit that she was a year old in 1957 and had no recollection of events surrounding Maria's disappearance. She also agreed that her mother never told her how she claimed to know the information that she imparted to Janet in the hospital room, and Janet never asked her mother that question. Janet admitted that her mother was disturbed emotionally while hospitalized, But on redirect, Janet did say that she believed her mother to be coherent and lucid when her mother made those statements.
Which is so funny because that's contrary to everything she had just said to the defense attorney.
Who knows? She could have had that moment of lucidity, and Dr. Janet was able to determine that.
That's quite a skill.
Exactly.
Well, and don't forget, and I'm saying this instead of Kathy because sometimes we can't control her, but no prosecution, especially a 50-year-old prosecution, is complete without an inmate witness. That's actually what they were called in this trial.
An inmate witness.
But we know them better as jailhouse snitches.
Yep.
But, Kathy, there wasn't just one or two. There were 3 of them.
It seems to me the number of jailhouse snitches is directly proportionate to the weakness of the prosecution's evidence.
It absolutely is. Because, Kathy, these guys, all of this came from conversations they either overheard or had, according to these inmates, with Jack McCullough when he was in the DeKalb County Jail in 2012. So when he was first arrested.
When he was 70.
Exactly. And it's funny too, like these guys were in for murder and violent rapes and all of these things. And they all toddled on into the courtroom and said, "Yes, Your Honor, I'm telling the truth." He had a long conversation with me and opened up about everything that had happened, all the gory details. And I'm thinking, a 71-year-old former police officer is not talking to you, inmate.
Yeah.
Snitch.
At all ever.
Exactly. So anyway, that was how the prosecution wrapped up their case. Now, defense attorneys brought 2 people to the stand to testify about Jack's mother's last days in the hospital. According to court records, half-sister Mary testified for McCullough that she was present in Eileen's hospital room, so this is Jack's mom, when Eileen made the statement to which Janet testified. According to Mary, she only heard Eileen say he did it without saying who he was or what it was. And not only did Janet not ask her mom, "What do you mean? Give me details," but when Mary asked Eileen for details, Eileen did not answer any of her questions. Now, the last witness was a surgeon who implanted an IV in Eileen's neck for the administration of morphine during her hospitalization. The doctor testified that morphine causes confusion and noted in Eileen's chart, Kath, that she was pleasantly confused. But he also noted that she was disoriented. So on September 15th, 2012, this is almost 55 years after Maria Ridulph was kidnapped and killed, Jack McCullough was found guilty of all 3 charges. 2 months later, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder and additional sentences of 5 years for kidnapping and 7 years for abduction of an infant. Now, Kath, prior to sentencing, in a letter to the court, Maria's older brother wrote in part, "The fact is, I see no victory here. No amount of punishment will undo the evil which Jack McCullough has done." But wait, there's more. McCullough appealed his convictions, and 3 years later, in 2015, the Illinois Appellate Court upheld his murder conviction, but his convictions for kidnapping and abduction were vacated because they were outside of the 3-year statute of limitations that were in effect at the time of those crimes in 1957. The decision, however, had no effect on McCullough's life sentence. But the story actually doesn't end there. The public defender who had originally represented Jack McCullough at trial had continued to investigate his case despite the fact that this attorney was no longer appointed to defend him. And so the public defender reached out to the court and asked them to reconsider the appeal. Now, in response to the motion, DeKalb County State's Attorney Richard Schmack, who had replaced the prosecutor in the 2012 trial, conducted an extensive review of the evidence because he wasn't familiar with the case, but it led him to conclude that Jack McCullough could not have committed the crime and was actually innocent. According to State's Attorney Schmack, evidence was kept out of the trial that clearly established McCullough's whereabouts on the evening of Maria Ridulph's abduction and supported the alibi he gave at the time. In particular, phone records from Illinois Bell showed that McCullough made a collect call to his mother that evening from a payphone in downtown Rockford rather than Sycamore, as was alleged at his trial. Now, given the timing of the telephone call, the approximately 40-mile distance between Sycamore and Rockford, and icy road conditions that night, Prosecutor Schmack concluded that McCullough could not possibly have been in Sycamore at the time of Maria Ridulph's disappearance.
Kath, so they admitted things into evidence about the payphone, but they said this call was from Sycamore?
Here's the thing, and this was crazy. In 2008, when investigators were looking back into this case, they pulled the records from Illinois Bell at the time, and it logged that a call was made from Rockford to Sycamore, a collect call to the Tessier family, but it wasn't made by John Tessier, as he was known at the time. It was made by someone named John Tassier.
What? Wait, hold on. You just said John Tessier twice.
No, I said Tassier.
Oh, Tassier.
T-A instead of T-E.
So wait, who is saying it was made by John Tassier?
Illinois Bell. That was the name that they had on there. Because when you do a collect call, it's like collect call from John Tessier. When it was transcribed, it was written down with the last name spelled incorrectly. And like I said, this was for this current trial when they started looking at it again. And they said, well, no, that's not him. The name's not right. So it should have stopped at that point. And it didn't. They just kept going. And that was what Prosecutor Schmack uncovered. Why did it not stop at this point? Because he was clearly in Rockford when this call was made. And by the way, Kathy, at this point, the Illinois Innocence Project was involved in this case.
4 years into serving a life sentence, at a March 2016 court hearing, McCullough's original conviction and sentence were overturned and a new trial was ordered. So McCullough remained charged with the crime, but was released on bond that same day pending a new trial. And 1 week later, charges were dismissed. However, the dismissal of the murder charge was without prejudice, meaning that McCullough could be tried again for the murder of Maria Ridulph anytime the prosecutor wished to file it. The judge received a request from Maria's brother, Charles Ridulph, backed by the signatures of hundreds of Sycamore citizens, including the city's mayor, requesting that a special prosecutor be appointed to replace State's Attorney Schmack on the McCullough case. 5 months later, this is August of 2016, the motion for a special prosecutor was denied. 8 months later, in April 2017, Jack McCullough was declared factually innocent of the crime by the DeKalb County Circuit Court. In 2020, the state of Illinois agreed to pay him just under $4 million for wrongful conviction. 3 years earlier, the city of Sycamore had settled for $300,000 on the condition that his case be dismissed with prejudice so he could never be tried again. And then the city of Seattle, where he was arrested in 2011, settled for $350,000.
And Kath, just quickly, I think the reason Seattle settled with him was that when they needed to interview Jack McCullough, because he had a military and a police background, they called in an expert interrogator. And I only read a little of the interrogator's report. I'm not sure where she got this notion, but she wrote in her report that McCullough talked about Maria Ridulph in a dreamy tone. And she said, I have no doubt he was madly in love with her because he kept talking like it was real, like she was still here. And it was funny because I did see an interrogation that was done not by her, but by the DeKalb County detectives. And Jack McCullough was just pissed. I mean, honestly, at that point, he was kind of a crotchety old man. And like the idea of him like waxing poetic over a 7-year-old or any woman just kind of struck me as maybe not 100% true.
But it also shows you how, I'm going to call them experts in quotes, will side with the police just because they think they're serving justice or just because they want more cases. I don't know. Or they need the credibility or they want to be, who knows?
Right. Could be any reason.
Sadly, the longest lasting cold case ever to go to trial in the United States, that of little Maria Ridulph, is still yet to be solved.
Okay, friends, thanks for listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know that you're just listening to us on YouTube. We're taking a video break for the holidays.
For the holidays, no video.
But we'll still be here every week with you on our audio.
Exactly. And we will be posting on YouTube nonetheless.
And if you want to see us on video, join Patreon.
Exactly.
Okay, don't forget to download. Happy Halloween. Be safe out there.
Yeah, happy Halloween. Get the best candy.
We want to hear if you guys are going as us.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Oh my gosh. Save me all the banana Laffy Taffies.
Yes, please. And what are those awful things called?
Oh my God. Moon pies.
That's it.
Yeah.
You can save those for her too.
For sure.
All right, bye.